A common question I'm frequently asked is, which sounds better, a clipper or a limiter? It's a question that, to be honest, doesn't have one simple answer. So in this video, I thought instead of just telling you which could sound better on different applications, we can actually test these out on different sounds and then you can decide which you prefer for yourself. But before we start, if you want to get your mixers to sound like professional songs, check out the Sage Audio membership. As a member, I have to say it's an incredible experience. Just for signing up, you receive 50 free mastered songs per year with your own dedicated mastering engineer, direct one-on-one mentorship that's tailored towards your specific mixing needs, unlimited mixing feedback to help improve your mixes, and access to Sage Audio University for in-depth mixing and mastering courses, but more on that at the end of the video. Knowing the differences between these processes can be extremely helpful when mixing, as they allow you to control your individual tracks and buses in totally new ways, along with being able to achieve louder, more competitive sounding mixes. Learning the basic functions of each and how these processes differ from each other is the key to unlocking the benefits of hard clipping, soft clipping, and limiting, and you may be surprised by how each change the sound. Before we get into the tests, let's briefly touch on the difference between clippers and limiters, so you know how each one affects the sound of your tracks. I've always found it easiest to think about how these two different processes affect the transients of a waveform first, so I'll throw some visuals on screen to help you better understand the differences between the two. Starting with limiters, these are gain reduction circuits that work by pulling down the peaks and raising the lowest parts of an audio signal to help better control the overall sound, whereas clippers will abruptly cut off the very peaks of your transients through distortion. However, clippers come in two different forms, hard clipping and soft clipping. A soft clipper is a particular kind of clipper designed to round off the peaks of an audio signal rather than abruptly cutting them off. This produces analog style clipping, resulting in a smoother sound compared to harsh digital clipping. So you might be asking, what's the theoretical benefits of each, and why do some people prefer one over the other for different mixing applications? Well, clippers preserve more transient punch despite cutting off more of the transient because they operate differently from limiters. Clippers essentially clip or truncate the peaks of the waveform, which can create a more aggressive sound by reducing dynamic range. This clipping process can sometimes retain more of the initial impact or punch of the transient compared to limiters, which attenuate the peaks more gradually. So even though clippers remove more of the transient's amplitude, the remaining portion can still retain a significant amount of its initial punch due to the rapid nature of clipping, which you'll hear as I gradually clip this audio example. On the other hand, limiters typically employ more complex algorithms to control the dynamics of the audio signal, which can introduce additional processing time, meaning they're generally slower acting than clippers. Clippers will also introduce odd-order harmonics, which impact the tone of your audio. Depending on how hard you clip your track, these harmonics can be more or less prevalent. So a clipper can often sound more punchy as a result because of the tone shaping and faster acting nature of the clipping process. For limiters, these are generally considered to be more transparent in sound, meaning they add less audible colour and harmonic distortion to your tracks. However, the trade-off is that they will often sound less punchy as a result of the gain reduction process. They can also introduce a slight pumping sound to a mix. A limiter will pull down the peaks of your audio, meaning that you'll lose some of that initial impact of the transient, although it does so in a way that won't introduce the same level of harmonic distortion that a clipper would. See if you can pick up on these changes as I gradually limit this audio example. I know that's quite a lot of detail to remember, but the key points there are that clippers are usually faster, punchier, and add more audible harmonic distortion to a signal, whilst limiters are normally more transparent in sound and introduce less harmonic distortion, though they often lack punch as a result of the limiting process. So now you have a good understanding of the differences between the two, you can probably imagine some mixing scenarios where one may be more preferable over the other. But instead of rattling off a list of times that you should use one over the other, I thought it'd be more helpful to do a series of tests, and you can decide which you prefer the sound of depending on the sound source. You might find that a clipper sounds better on something when, in theory, you thought the limiter would make more sense, or vice versa. Remember, the most important thing is how these processes sound, and not how they look. So for test 1, I've got a simple acoustic drum beat. I'll start off with the unprocessed track, which will then go from hard clipping to soft clipping and then limited. Each track has been level matched, so you won't be tricked by any change in volume, and the processing has been slightly exaggerated to, in theory, highlight the differences between each example. So to me, I actually found the differences between the clipped and limited drums to be more subtle than I initially thought they'd be. I do hear differences between the three processed tracks, but they weren't as apparent as I thought they'd be. To my ear, the hard clipped drums definitely sounded the most distorted, which checks out from what we discussed earlier, whilst the differences between the soft clipped and limited drums I found to be harder to pick up on. I think listening closely to the limited drums, you can hear that the hi-hat almost sounds like it's being hit harder, which makes sense given that the limiter is pushing up the quieter parts of the signal too, whereas the snare in the soft clipped track sounds a little more punchy, and the limited one sounds more roomy to my ear. But what did you think? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down below, as I'd love to hear how you may have perceived these sounds differently to me. The next test is going to be on bass, to contrast the very transient heavy example we just had. I wanted something that was more tonal, so that you can really hear how these processors act differently, depending on the types of sound sources you apply each to. So I'll repeat the same process as before, with the first clip being the unprocessed audio, which then goes to the hard clipper, then the soft clipper, and finally the limiter. For this test, I personally found the differences a bit more noticeable than the drum test. With the hard clipping example, the distortion is very noticeable to me across the whole track. The soft clipper definitely sounded cleaner to my ear, however I could still hear some slightly unpleasant distortion on each of the note changes. The limited one sounded very controlled, and I think the slightly less punchy sound would actually be a benefit here, at least for the way I like to mix bass. I prefer basses to be more of a consistent, controlled sound across the entirety of my mix, and I'm usually a lot less concerned about the actual transients of this particular instrument. So in a way, both the benefits and drawbacks of using a limiter would be an advantage, at least for the styles of music I typically mix. But what about you? Which one did you prefer for test 2? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. We're going to do one final test, this time on vocals, but instead of telling you which track is a hard clipped, soft clipped and limited version, I'm going to make this a blind test and you can leave your guesses in the comment section. I'll start out with the unprocessed version like before, so you have something to reference first, and then I'll mix up the order of the next 3 tracks. I'll label these A, B and C, and you'll have to let me know which one you think is the soft clipped, hard clipped and limited versions.
This feels like a war zone. What are we fighting for? This feels like a war zone. What are we fighting for? This feels like a war zone. What are we fighting for? This feels like a war zone. What are we fighting for?
As I mentioned earlier, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, check out the Sage Audio membership. As a member, I have to say it's an incredible experience. Just for signing up, you receive 50 free mastered songs per year with your own dedicated mastering engineer, direct one-to-one mentorship that's tailored towards your specific needs, unlimited mixing feedback to help improve your mixes, and access to Sage Audio University for in-depth mixing and mastering courses. Your dedicated mastering engineer will learn your sound and craft masters specific to your preferences, and you also get unlimited revisions to ensure every master sounds exactly how you want. The one-to-one mentorship gives you personalized mixing guidance tailored towards your specific needs. Get all your questions answered with fast communication and receive unlimited advanced mixing feedback and suggestions for improvement. Coupled with the one-to-one mentorship, you also get access to Sage Audio University, where you'll find their in-depth mixing and mastering courses, walkthrough sessions for multiple genres, multi-track project files for hands-on practice, and a Sage Audio certification document for completing the courses. Additionally, you'll also be able to enter their mixing and mastering competitions to win prizes while growing your skills alongside a tight-knit group of audio engineers. Inside the membership, you'll have access to the Sage Audio community, which is full of passionate producers and engineers ready to have meaningful discussions, network, and collaborate. The membership also includes over 70 gigabytes of downloadable content, including mixing and mastering chains, multi-tracks for mixing practice, recommended free plugins, recommended paid plugins, and plugin presets. Furthermore, you'll get direct access to their full catalogue of 700 plus in-depth mixing and mastering videos, specifically created to help you improve every aspect of your mixes. Every day, I see great wins in the membership from producers and engineers, noticing a massive improvement in their mixes after joining. Use the link in the description today to join the Sage Audio membership with a 70% discount and start creating mixes that sound like professional songs.